What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 255 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week on the podcast, solar plus batteries is having a huge moment that could be a major shift in energy worldwide. An aluminum plant is going to get most of its electricity from solar plus 8 hours of battery storage. That means the aluminum will be green, just like the aging leftovers you wrapped in aluminum foil, Brian.
This week, a listener tells us about how he connected his heat pump hot water heater to his HVAC system to help cool his house, proving our listeners are the smartest podcast listeners around. Forget AI, the Clean Energy Show hive mind is way smarter.
It's not good enough to recycle 90 or 95% of lithium from batteries. As we've talked about previously on the show, someone has gone out and made it 100%, which is great news. Now we can recycle lithium forever, just like we'll be recycling climate disaster headlines for the rest of our lives. And that joke was written by AI, Brian, because the refinery near my house exploded this morning. More on that later.
Yikes.
So I had to get AI to do it. And Brian, it knows we're all going to die. It knows.
New technology for drilling could help power future geothermal energy production. Millimeter wave technology is similar to a microwave oven and can drill through rock deep in the ground. The rock blasted with millimeter waves becomes almost as hot as a microwave burrito.
Whoa, all that and more in this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
So, just got back from Fargo, North Dakota.
When'd you get back?
Just got back on Sunday.
Okay, Sunday night.
And we checked out the Fargo Film Festival. So I found out a couple of years ago, they moved the festival 2 weeks later. It used to be very early in March, and now it's 2 weeks later. And they did that to try and avoid the worst of the winter weather. Mm-hmm. But of course, 2 years ago, even though it was 2 weeks later, massive blizzard. And then this year, we had another blizzard. That's a smaller one, but a mini blizzard on the way out of town when we were driving back. So
is that right? Yeah,
we drove north from Fargo to Grand Forks. And it took about an hour long, like it's supposed to be a 90-minute drive, and it took us about 2.5 hours because it was a bad blizzard.
Yeah.
And then it improved after that, and it wasn't so terrible.
But you've got winter tires on your car.
Yeah.
And are they studded? Because you're a studded man.
No, these ones are not studded.
They're not studded. Okay. But you got pretty good winter tires, eh?
Yeah, but, really the traffic, was going about half the normal speed. There was really nothing you could do about it. And you never know what weather we're going to get in March. And Fargo gets pretty similar weather to us.
So Brian and I live approximately where the North Dakota-Montana border joins, and in Canada, a couple hours north of the border. So what route did you take to get there? Did you go to Winnipeg first and stay overnight, or how did that work?
Yeah, we stayed in Brandon, Manitoba overnight on the way down there.
Oh, really?
So
that's, you wimp. Here to Brandon's nothing. I could bike there, for God's sake. Come on.
Yeah. 4-hour drive.
That's a short leg. Oh.
But that was the way to do it, because then on the way back, we did it all in one day. And because of that blizzard at the beginning, it was way too long. So
how long was it?
Well, 10 hours at least.
Yeah, that's a long day for a man your age.
Yeah. So I think, driving 4 or 5 hours is the way to go. I don't want to do that anymore. But quick recap of the Fargo Film Festival. It was the 25th edition. I was there for the first time in the third year, 2003. So I wasn't there quite from the beginning, but have been going on and off since 2003. There was a fun documentary about obsessive film collectors, people that steal, I guess sometimes they steal them, but, secure old film prints of movies and secure them in their own private collections and occasionally donate them to archives. And they often end up back at the studios that made them. The studios have often, not taken care of their own film prints. So every once in a while, one of these collectors gets a call from a studio saying, hey, do you have a copy of this movie that we made, 80 years ago? But anyway, there was this one guy who drives around the United States finding abandoned drive-in movie theaters, and he'll find the owners and he'll get permission to go into the old projection booths, which have been often closed for 20, 30 years, and there's often old movie film prints in there.
And he knows that, eh? So he's been going back trying to collect. That's very interesting.
And that's his hobby, driving around to abandoned drive-in movie theaters around the United States.
But does he make money off of it too?
I mean, occasionally you would probably make money by selling one of these prints. But no, this is a hobby for people who like losing money, mostly.
Okay. That'd be me.
But anyway, they had a 40th anniversary screening of The Breakfast Club with Molly Ringwald was in attendance. She did a Q&A afterwards. That was a fun time, packed theater. People just love that movie. It's, this real time capsule.
Can you imagine watching The Breakfast Club with one of the primary cast members? I mean, that's weird, eh? That's wild.
No, and the audience just loved, like people were quoting lines from the movie as it was playing.
Oh, there were some fanatics there.
Oh, yeah, fanatics. They were singing along with that Simple Minds song and everything. But one of the central plots, so the Judd Nelson character, these are characters stuck in a detention all day at a high school. The Judd Nelson character is completely awful to the Molly Ringwald character throughout the entire movie. And then she kisses him at the end. Like, it makes absolutely no sense.
Oh, it makes total sense.
And Molly Ringwald wrote an article about this a few years ago about how these movies don't really hold up in terms of the, the male-female dynamics. But didn't bother the audience at all. They just loved it, ate it up.
Well, as the parent of a high school girl, I can tell you that they're still awful to girls, even when they like them.
Yeah, I guess that's how it works. But anyway, Fargo now has a version 4 Tesla supercharger. I was completely surprised by this and a little bit confused.
Who?
It must be brand new.
Where?
In Fargo. They now have 2 superchargers in Fargo.
2?
2.
It's not a huge city, Fargo. It may be famous, but it's not a huge city.
And I've been to their other supercharger, and it's not like it's super busy or anything. So I don't know what prompted that, but it must be just brand new because it wasn't showing up on Google Maps. It only showed up in the Tesla navigation.
Okay.
So we went there to charge on the way out of town. I'd never used one before. The cables are just a lot thicker and heavier.
Are they?
So it's a bit more probably like, using a CCS charger. They're a little bit more unwieldy to manage. But
so some of these cables, when they have so much power, they actually have cooling loops, like a fluid, goes through a tube just to pull the heat off of it so that, it doesn't go down. It doesn't become more resistive to the electricity going through because of heat.
Yeah.
I'm talking like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't. I'm not an electrical engineer.
They're thicker and heavier cables. They're a bit harder to maneuver, and they won't charge my car any faster. Like they do have a higher, faster.
Who does it benefit then?
The future?
The future? What about, say, a Porsche Taycan who comes up and can charge at around, what are they, 350 or something? Would they be able to take advantage of that with an adapter?
I would think so.
Or they're not the ones with the different plugs on them. They're just V4, right? They're not the...
Yeah, it's just V4. It's got the standard Tesla plug on it, yeah.
But there's some that will dispense a CCS adapter with it if you do it from the app. It wasn't one of those, eh?
Yeah, no, and I think those are only the version 3 ones.
Okay.
These are different looking pedestals. They're solid rather than have a hole in the middle. But anyway, that was a weird surprise. I don't know why they have 2 supercharged. And the one in Grand Forks is a new one, so we stopped there for the first time. So there's now quite a few chargers on the way there.
Yeah, and it used to be even more of a desert than we are in Saskatchewan, Canada here, which we have problems. But people wanting to go south, and there was a lot of them, less so now for some reason, but there was a lot of them that wanted to go through the United States, myself included. You, a regular yearly visitor to the Fargo Film Festival, they should make you a board member or something. Why haven't they done that?
Sure.
But there's not a lot of stuff going on down there as far as charging goes. And, there's an east-west interstate that's really kind of not great for EV drivers, but I think that's changing now.
Yeah, and there's supposed to be a supercharger opening in Minot, but it's still not open, and yet Fargo has 2 of them. It's a bit strange.
Well, the Minot one's going to be important for people in our province going south. You will have more options when you do make that trip. So, Brian, I woke up to the news, not to the explosion, but there was an explosion. I live, 3/4 of a mile from a refinery, and I'm not too worried about it blowing up. It could blow up. Yeah. Refineries very rarely blow up. They have a lot of safety in place. Not too worried about that. But if it did, a lot of people would be dead, including the workers and some of the people in my neighborhood in Regina, Saskatchewan. But it did have an explosion again last night. It's been a few years since that's happened. And I have a clip of that because somebody recorded it on their security cam outside their house.
Oh,
Now, I'm thinking the news station didn't say where this was in town, but I noticed that the flash from the explosion happened a lot sooner than the actual explosion. Listen to this. Yeah, that's what was recorded, and a sort of a double bang there. And it was a few seconds when the flash happened before that explosion took place. So, made me think, and a lot of people think, the author of the book that I participated in, she posted that chapter from her book this morning, or linked to it. I don't know when she posted it. So it's publicly available now, and I can share it with anyone who has listened to our show and hear me talk about it. Especially if you live in our city, I'm telling you, people, you need to read this and be aware of it. You shouldn't not know what's going on. And I think it will cause you to close your windows and maybe even buy an air purifier like I did. It's a large diameter. I think it's 16 kilometers where the cancer rates go up. That wasn't mentioned in the book. That's a Texas study. I don't want to get sued by anybody, but I noticed that the fire pictures on the news had unmanned hoses, like the hoses were set so that they could not be near what they were putting out. I don't know if that's a safety concern or an air concern. Fortunately, there was only 2 minor injuries, and they were apparently very minor. But if you want, you can go to our Patreon page. If you're listening to this, by the time you're listening to this, it'll be publicly available on our Patreon page. As we record this and our Patreoners get our podcast early, they're getting access to that. So it's a good read. I find it a chilling and informative read. And Brian, that book is largely about how big oil has so much control over politics that the book's title is ungovernable. In other words, the government can't control big oil. And holy crap, is that ever true? And I would love to live to see the day that that's no longer true. The problem is oil brings in so much money and so much revenue, but we subsidize those bastards in the billions and billions of dollars. In fact, more than anywhere else in the world. So like all countries with oil and gas, there are subsidies in Canada for fossil fuels. Canada provides significant financial support to the oil and gas industry through various forms of subsidies, including loan guarantees, public financing, tax breaks, despite its commitment recently to phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, which is the movement worldwide. But is it happening? Not so much yet. The government of Canada has committed to phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies as per their G20 commitment. In 2023, the latest figures, $18.5 billion we gave to oil and gas. And we even built them a pipeline, which is not included in that number. And that number was another, I forget how much it was. It was probably like $20 billion for this pipeline that went from the oil sands to the west coast through the mountains. It doubled the Trans Mountain pipeline capacity. Basically, it's a welfare industry, even in boom times. Now, when Canada is under an existential crisis from the United States government with tariffs designed to destroy our economy and increasing rhetoric about the U.S. annexing us, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith, that's the premier with all the oil, think MTG with less intellect. And a lot of people in her party are separatists. Her cabinet is made up of people who want to separate from Canada because we're not treating the oil and the gas with respect or something like that. And she's threatening to create a constitutional crisis, an unprecedented constitutional crisis, as if we haven't had ones before with Quebec, the French language province wanting to separate in the 90s, coming close on a referendum. That's since backed away. And in fact, they're more Canadian now than ever. But one of the things that she wants the federal government, with the next federal government, we've got an election going on, whoever is in power, to bow to her with a long list of demands. And one of them is that plastic straws not be banned. She's willing to break up the freaking country over plastic straws because it makes her feel bad that we don't appreciate the oil that goes into those straws, even though it's destroying the planet, and that's the reason why we're doing it.
Yes, we have rules now about single-use plastics in Canada because it's been, of course, an epidemic in the last few decades of single-use plastics that are just filling up our landfills.
Plastic straws. We get them or the country breaks apart. In a time of our most existential of crises. Right now. It's incredible. I have to go through there this summer, and I don't want to spend any money while I'm there. But I have to. Maybe I'll bring a tent and sleep on the side of the road. but I have to get through there to visit my son on the West Coast. She's also calling for net zero electricity and vehicle targets to be shelved. In other words, this is the stuff of Yemen. Yemen has the same point of view. Like very few countries in the world are calling for this. We're all got together with the COP summits and agree on stuff. And because she has oil, because she's addicted to the money, she has sold her soul to Satan, and everyone in Alberta has by voting for her. And she's calling for pipelines to be built by the feds in all directions. No pipeline company thinks it's a good business case, so the government would have to pay for that. And based on how much that last pipeline cost, based on the kilometers and spreading it to the East Coast, the North Coast, and the West Coast again, would cost $500 billion from the government because it's not financially viable, because maybe the pipeline companies listen to our show. They don't listen to our show, but they know they consume the same information that we do, which is information that it's not a good business case right now to be building oil and gas pipelines. And that she's scared because of what we talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago about the U.S. refineries saying, well, we don't need Alberta oil. We could shift if we had to. That scared the daylights out of her. That and the Chinese road crude oil demand peaking last year or in the next couple of years. That's because they were counting on that. So yeah, $500 billion perhaps from one estimate. And we have to put an end to this. Brian, I'm sick of this. It is just the refinery book covers how, it's ungovernable. And then the governments of people who do have oil are willing to pretend up is down, black is white. They're pretending the world is not burning, and she wants to double the output of oil. Of course, that's not going to happen. And I try to inform people whenever I can, including my long, long rant last week.
Okay, so moving on from dirty energy back to clean energy, our favorite topic. This is from Canary Media about millimeter wave drilling. So we've been talking about geothermal power production recently on the show. This is a thing that's existed for a long time, but has not been super widespread. But there's a nice article on Canary Media about a couple of different companies that are working to improve this technology. And one of the ways is millimeter wave technology. And apparently this is kind of similar to microwave technology. It's a way of drilling with, microwaves or millimeter waves, and you can drill through rock. And apparently you can go like several miles deep with this kind of technology. And
that's all you need for geothermal, really.
Yeah. Once you get to a certain depth, you would have, and the deeper you can go, the hotter it gets.
I love the headline of the article. The smell of toasted rock could spell victory for geothermal energy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I don't know what that smells like.
Toasted rock has a smell, but yeah, instead of drilling it with conventional drills, you blast it with these millimeter waves and it liquefies it. And then, you suck that rock out and you can end up with these very, very deep holes. There's another company that currently has a tunnel 3.4 miles in New Mexico. And they're working on another project in Germany. So, yeah, this is the kind of thing that can make geothermal. It's still not a big thing, and this is very much a future kind of thing that's going to happen. But, there are advances in drilling in 2025. People are figuring out how to drill better. And we learned a lot through fracking, and sometimes they use that kind of fracking technology.
Yeah.
But this is even kind of beyond that.
I'm going to have a story later in the show about how solar plus batteries is doing the ultimate in baseload like stuff now, and that's seen as a turning point, a big turning point in the world because of the technology and the prices have sort of coincided. But I know that there's advances in geothermal. I know that there's even some deep drilling going on, very, very deep drilling. And they're advancing, but I also know that it's slow. It's like nuclear energy slow to do these things.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a concern because we have less than 10 years to decarbonize the electricity grids of the world.
Yeah. And as we often talk about on the show, if I was trying to create energy, solar, wind, and batteries is by far the simplest and quickest. So that's what I would tend to focus on. These other things like nuclear, it just takes too long. It's more complicated than it needs to be. And yet, yeah, people are going to work on it, and hopefully someday it works.
And by the way, except for our AI joke earlier, this is a podcast powered by solar today. It's a nice sunny day, and Brian and I both have solar going strong. Yeah, I just worry about that. I know that it's great. It's a great technology, but it's so slow. It's so slow. And I wish we were at this point 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it might be 20 years too late. Like, how is it going to compete? And it's great that it's base load, and it's great. Maybe it's greater for Canada because we have such seasonal variability of solar. Maybe it's great for places like us, but we don't have that much geothermal around here. Ours in Saskatchewan that they've been trying to do, it's 3 years overdue already, 5 years total, is right at the U.S. border. That's the only place where it's viable. It's in, I think it's in North Dakota or Montana, that there's this sort of kind of where the oil is kind of where the geothermal is as well. But yeah, hopefully that makes some progress. You had an update from that a couple of weeks ago, and we'll see. But if you can drill deeper, then they say you can do this anywhere, pretty much anywhere, right? So if you can get through whatever's there, then yeah, we could do it. We do have some geothermal around here for spas, right? There's a spa in Moose Jaw that has it. They're thinking of doing that for our swimming pool here where we are, although it's an expensive proposition. I'm hopeful for it. I think there'll be some use case scenarios for it, and I think a lot remains to be seen. Aluminum from solar plus batteries in Australia. This is what I was talking about. This is from The Guardian and some other places. You can see it on your clean energy blogs and various places as well. The tariff war that we have here in Canada, you may not be paying much attention in the United States, but we sure are in Canada. And there's a lot of talk about how auto parts go back and forth, and our auto industry is strong and needs to stay strong, and it's reliant. This is just the way they did it. But I also learned a lot about aluminum, Brian, because a lot of the world's aluminum is made in Quebec, Canada, and there's a reason for that. What does Quebec have? We talked about it many times on the show. It has overly abundant hydroelectricity, which is low cost to them. So some people call aluminum solidified electricity because you need electricity to make aluminum, just like you do to make green hydrogen. It's an electrolysis process that requires a tremendous amount of electricity. So that's why we make aluminum in Canada, in Quebec specifically, is because of that electricity. Now, in Australia, by the way, 90% of Canada's aluminum is exported to the United States. So that gets tricky for them when we start talking about tariffs, especially on aluminum. The electrolysis process used to extract aluminum from ore requires a massive amount of electricity. So aluminum, you can't just go and stick a shovel in the ground and get aluminum. You got to get it out of ore. So what kind of ore is that? I think it's bauxite. So you mine bauxite, and then you take the aluminum out of the bauxite. That's the best way of getting it. And then you have to process it with massive, massive amounts of electricity. And Quebec Hydro is no laughing matter. There is a lot of electricity. It's even exported to the United States vastly. So that's pretty significant. Some say making aluminum is kind of like storing the electricity in the solid matter because you're putting it there. You can't take it out again, but you have a product, I guess. This is from The Guardian, okay? A mining company Rio Tinto will buy solar power and battery storage capacity for its Gladstone aluminum operations in a deal environmentalists have hailed as a major step forward. The company has signed a 20-year agreement to buy 90% of the power and battery storage capacity generated by two large solar farms located in central Queensland in Australia. Together with existing wind and solar agreements, renewable energy is now expected to meet 80% of the smelter's electricity needs, reducing the facility's direct emissions by 70%. Construction on the projects was expected to be completed in 2028, delivering 600 megawatts of solar power and up to 2400 megawatt hours of battery storage each day. 8 hours, Brian.
Yeah.
We used to talk about 2 hours. Then we talked a little bit about 4 hours recently, and now 8 hours is kind of starting to become a thing for some use case scenarios. And at the Premier of Alberta that I talked about earlier, I had a clip of her on a show once saying, I was told that it was only 2 hours, and we said, why is it only 2 hours of storage? You can have whatever you want. It's if you have a camcorder, you buy extra batteries. You can go forever. You had a flashlight. It can literally last forever if you change the batteries. You just add more batteries. So this is a tipping point year for solar plus storage. A lot of analysts are saying. Quinsbrook's co-founder David Skasbrook said, we are swapping out coal-fired power for effectively something close to baseload renewables, predominantly anchored by solar and battery storage technology. To an industrial user like Rio, it's a game changer, and it really gets them over that threshold of cost, particularly when you think about aluminum smelting as one of the most price-sensitive industry applications you can have. So he says you're right. We are at a tipping point, and that is just a case there for doing what a lot of people say can't be done.
Yeah.
We need nuclear because it's baseload. And God, we hear that around our province a lot. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not true. And we knew that. It's not, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure this stuff out. If something is really cheap and it's getting cheaper, then you know that's the future.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's move on to the mailbag. Okay, listener mail. Hi, Brian and James. Love the show. I just wanted to share my hot water tank heat pump experience in response to your discussion regarding this topic on today's episode, which I think was last week. For context, I live in Edmonton, Alberta, and we got a Rheem ProTerra a couple of years ago. I think we were the company's second installed unit at the time. This is a heat pump water heater. We went for the model that runs on 240 volt with a 15 amp circuit versus 30 amps, since we already had an EV charger installed with our 100 amp service, for a 2016 Nissan Leaf with a 24 kilowatt battery, not too different from James's. He says he's at 137 kilometers now and hope my heater lasts a few more years.
137,000 on the odometer. And yeah, my advice to you is be careful. Don't preheat the car like I did. I used to preheat it in minus 40 and it would go for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And that's what the Nissan Leafs do. They'll go for as much as 2 hours it is like literally a toaster in there. Like it's too hot when you got in, but it's a waste. And if you don't go out, then it's like you cancel a trip. It's pre-programmed to do that. So my advice is to just appreciate your heater being working and just turn it on manually and use it as little as you can. But God, I wish I had a heater.
Yeah. Okay, so the letter continues. The cold, yes, it gets cold. When the heat pump kicks in after baths for my two boys, the basement temperature would drop down about 4 degrees Celsius from where it was. So this is what you were wondering. In the room that the heat pump is in, it actually has to expel cold when it's making heat. So that room can get colder, and he says 4 degrees Celsius. This is the whole
basement temperature, though. The whole basement is getting 4 degrees
that's
colder.
Right. You're right. That's what he says.
You're going to feel that. That's significant.
Okay, it continues. In the summer, when we turn off our furnace, it would feel really cold when sleeping in the basement. In the winter, the gas furnace cancels out the effects when running. After a year of this, we hired the company to connect the heat pump to our furnace ducts so it circulates the cold air throughout the house. We were the first customers to do this. This has the benefit of some modest AC during the scorchingly hot summers of late. If in the winter, the furnace cancels out any cold so we don't notice it much. The noise, it registers at 50 decibels on my phone at a meter's distance. When watching TV in the next room, it's not really an issue with the door closed. Neither does it bug me if I sleep in the TV room. I could see it being annoying if it was directly on the other side of the wall from where I sleep, though, although maybe some people would find it to be a soothing white noise kind of situation. I've included pics so you can see how it looks connected to the furnace ducts in our basement. Thanks for the show. That's from Roshan. And they included a couple of pictures. So, there's, you can just hook up your, heat pump water heater to the HVAC. So the cold goes somewhere. So it's at least distributed throughout the house, so it's not just freezing that one room or the basement.
So if you have an air duct heating and cooling ventilation system, HVAC, then that sounds like a good idea. And it sounds like, where did they get the idea from, I'm wondering? Did they come up with that himself, or is that something that some people do? And how did the installer feel about that? I have questions. Curious.
It's certainly the first time I've heard of it, but if anyone else out there has information on doing this themselves.
That makes perfect sense. It's like a heat recovery system from your drain. If the water going into your water heater comes from the drain, it's preheated from the water going down the shower. 4 degrees is pretty significant in a house.
Yeah.
For one floor. So why not put it to use and not waste it? Or I wonder if you could just turn on the furnace fan. Like when I grew up, my house, my parents would always turn on the furnace fan before we had air conditioning.
Yeah.
And I think they take the door off the furnace so it would suck it in from downstairs.
Well, okay.
I don't know if that's how wrong that is, or if was it a brilliant idea? I don't know. But it seemed to work.
Yeah, well, the basement air would be a little cooler, so that would make sense to distribute that cool air. You might get a little bit of a cooler effect.
I don't know how cooler it was, but it was a lot. It felt a lot cooler. Anyway, we love to hear letters like that or anything that's on your mind. Anything. We don't care. We've also got other letters that we're not featuring on the show. We thank you for writing them in, and we'll look at those stories that you suggested. And we'd love to hear from you. So, even on our Discord server, Brian, that we have for all of our paid members of Patreon, Richard introduced himself. And the head honcho at the Discord server is my daughter, and she came up to me and said, Dad, there's somebody who's introduced themselves. Because you know what? I still don't understand Discord. We have to give it out as a free perk to our Patreon members because that's what people do. But I'm sorry. I just haven't used Discord. She uses it, hours a day because it's part of her volunteer job with a gaming company. Richard introduced himself. He said, I'm Philip's friend. As per Brian's mention on the 5th anniversary show, I'm a retired software engineer. So do you remember the context of that? What was the story that you were talking about?
Yeah, I was at a coffee shop and my friend Philip came up to me and said, I've got a friend in Ottawa who listens to the show. So we shouted out.
That's him. Okay.
We shouted out Richard without knowing his name. So now we know his name.
Okay. Well, that's nice. Contact us by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. That's all one word, cleanenergyshow. And you can leave us a voicemail online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow, all one word. Join the conversation on our Patreon page for free. Get access to additional content and all of our social media posts, as well as additional content that members get. And welcome to the new members, Landon Yu, Mr. and Bob Eaton, Josh Engen, and Sean Ennis. Follow there for free. Join a paid tier to support our work. Get lots of those perks in return, including our Patreon podcast that comes out once a month, ad-free episodes, and shout-outs on the show.
Okay, another story from Canary Media. This caught my eye because it mentioned the fact that often lower-income homes actually use more power per square foot than other larger homes. Like we all know about giant McMansion homes, which are kind of becoming the norm here in North America. And they're huge users of energy, but because you might have a smaller home, but it often is maybe not insulated properly, maybe doesn't have the newest technology, that often smaller homes with, lower income residents use more power per square foot. This was really, really surprising to me. So this story comes from Duke Energy in North Carolina. This is a utility there. And when COVID struck, they kind of came up with a program to help their lower income residents with bills, and the rate hikes. And they're now extending that program to include things like energy upgrades. So if you can upgrade the insulation in your home when you can't really afford it, then, maybe this won't be the case in the future that, a smaller property uses more energy per square foot.
This is something we have to do. It's one of you always hear about this as a strategy in government policy, is helping people do building energy efficiency upgrades, whether it's industrial or residential or in single-family homes. And there have been, over the past 20 years, we've seen stories about low-income people getting solar. It doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But, Van Jones from CNN, that's kind of how he started, was a nonprofit for helping poor neighborhoods get solar on their roofs and thus lower their energy bill. And there's talk about having programs for rental houses that do that because a lot of low-income people are renters. It is, I understand that. Like my starter home here was a wartime house. Like it was one of those very small A-frame houses that was efficiently built for soldiers coming home from World War II. But it was built in 1946 and, I think it had real insulation in the walls, but there was occasional places where newspapers were the form of insulation, which is interesting to find them, really old newspapers. But yeah, and then I remember during that time, this was, in the early 2000s, there was a nonprofit in Toronto that had this plan to upgrade wartime houses because there was tens of thousands of them in the country.
Yeah.
So if they could have a one operation fits all where they learn from that. And I was very interested in that, but I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And there were many, many houses built with that plan, the same one as your first house. So absolutely, if you figure out how to do it for one, you can do it for more. And if I have anyone, advice for people buying a house, I wish I had done that more when I bought my home because we have upgraded insulation, but only in kind of bits and pieces and where we need it. So if you buy an old house, that's probably the first thing you should do is maybe rip down the drywall and spray foam everything and, get it up to a more modern standard. No, it's not cheap. That's the unfortunate thing. And of course, that's why I didn't do it at the time.
But if you can afford it, or if it's in your budget with buying the new house or a fixer-upper, for example, some people buy houses that they intentionally fix up. And I kind of did that here with a lot of things. Like it wasn't a move-in ready house as far as our family was concerned. I was kind of falling apart in the kitchen and downstairs. So we upgraded that, and the bathroom was a little bit as well. You know, you'll have a better experience. It'll cost you money, but you'll save money over the long term. Your monthly bills will be lower, and all that goes up in price, right? Your electricity, your heating costs all goes up over, say you're planning on staying there for 25 years. You're guaranteed that price will be higher then. So it's a good investment, and it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
Especially if you live in a cold climate like we do, or even moderate.
And it's often like it's one of those upgrades you don't automatically see. Like you don't see the insulation behind the walls. So some people have a tough time justifying the cost when it's an upgrade that, potential future home buyers can't really see. But yeah, it's so much more comfortable to live in a house that's well insulated.
With the trend towards heat pumps, especially in say Canada, most places in Canada, you'll need upgraded insulation for that to work out very well. Like you're an example of a heat pump in a very cold climate. Yeah. It would work had you better insulation the way you figure it, right? That's what you believe, that it would work fine.
Like it works fine 99% of the time. It's just when it's minus 40, it's got a little bit of trouble keeping up. So, we have a few rooms that we should do some more insulation in.
So what do you do? Do you gut those rooms?
Well, yeah, I would probably take down the drywall and then spray foam it. That's my sort of.
So you're pro spray foam so far, right?
There's many different ways to do it, but I've always liked spray foam.
Because?
I don't know. I like the simplicity of it, and
it can't get moldy, really. It's
a vapor barrier.
It adds to airtight. Yeah, it's a vapor barrier as well as insulation. So does that come down in price, or do you find it's pretty expensive still?
Yeah, it tends to be expensive, I guess. But
okay, well, it's a good way to do things, and I wish I had, my. I wish I could do that. I wish I could spray foam everything.
There's spray foam here in my bomb shelter behind the drywall.
So last night, 2 nights ago, I had insomnia, the worst insomnia. So I had like 3 hours of sleep all day yesterday. Couldn't think straight. And then I went to bed last night really tired. And I woke up really hot. Like I've got this foam on top of my mattress because it's a little stiff.
Yeah.
A little firm for my liking. And it's only a couple of inches thick or not even. And it makes me so hot. And I don't know what it is, but my bedroom here is like 13 by 13 feet or something like that. That's where I'm podcasting from today. And it's got a router, which seems to go, generate heat. Too much heat. I don't know why they can't make those things more efficient. So I woke up sweating and I said, my window was already open. Like it's wintertime here. And I already had it open a couple of 3 inches. And I just had it wide open. I just opened it all the way because the wind, if the wind was coming from the direction into the window, I would be an icicle in no time. Yeah. But because it was coming from a different direction, which was advantageous when your refinery blows up and you want to be upwind, not downwind from the refinery, which turned out well. But had it not been the case, my window would have been wide open during a toxic leak of something. And we don't know. And we will never know, unfortunately, about what leaked out of that refinery for toxins. No one will know because they're ungovernable, and it pisses me off. All right, Brian, nearly 100% of lithium is recycled in latest EV battery breakthrough. This is from The Independent. We have a link there in your show notes. Always turn to your show notes for links, or sometimes we have stories on our Patreon page, and sometimes they are gift links. So you don't need a subscription to the news site that you're going to. Scientists have developed a method that extracts an astonishing 99.99% of lithium from old batteries. This is scientists doing science, Brian.
Yeah.
This is good things. Remember when scientists were cool? When we all looked up to them? We didn't poop on them? This could be a game changer for reducing e-waste and making electric vehicle production more sustainable. Let's break it down. The growing problem of battery waste. We all know that lithium-ion batteries power our modern world. We know that from our show, from smartphones to electric cars and everything in between. But what happens when these batteries reach the end of their life? Right now, millions of old batteries are piling up. Not so much EV batteries, but batteries from stuff, creating a massive e-waste problem Traditional recycling methods are not only inefficient but also environmentally harmful due to toxic chemicals and emissions. A team of Chinese researchers has discovered a revolutionary way to recycle lithium-ion batteries. Their method uses tiny micro-batteries to break down key metals, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, before extracting them with an amino acid called glycine. The result? Nearly 100%. Let's call it 100%. 99.99? I think that's 100% in my book.
Let's round it up.
Lithium recovery. Along with impressive recovery rates for other essential minerals as well, which are not at 100%, but closer than they were. So the best part, the process just takes 15 minutes and doesn't produce toxic byproducts. And everyone, including myself and including people who don't listen to the show, might think and assume, and I don't blame you for thinking that batteries could be a problem, but I bet you hardly anyone knows that they're 100% recyclable or close overall with all their essential minerals. Why this matters? The discovery could significantly impact the battery industry. You know, we talk about circular economy coming up one day. That's what we're all gearing towards, is that once a certain amount of electric vehicles get put onto the streets of the world, then we don't mine hardly anything for them because we just use the recycle, because that's the cheapest way to do it as well. It's cheaper than mining. For one, it makes recycling more cost-effective and environmentally friendly. It also helps reduce the need for mining new lithium, which is an energy-intensive and often controversial process. With EV demand soaring, a substantial lithium supply is crucial. A lot of people worry about that, but we've also reported on the show that there's plenty. They just didn't look for it before. Now they're looking for it, and there's actually quite a bit of it. The researchers believe their method could pave the way for large-scale, pollution-free battery recycling. And if this technology is commercialized, it could transform the way we handle e-waste and strengthen supply chains for critical minerals. So that's always a good news story when that happens.
Yeah, and like a lot of clean energy technology, this is still only the first or second generation of this process.
We're just beginning, man. We're just starting. Yeah, so it's already pretty damn good progress, I'd say.
If they're already at 100% for lithium and then getting closer, presumably, for other materials, you know, this can only get better.
Well, coming up next, it's the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
China is finding its power grid can't keep up to the massive deployment of cheap solar. Uh-oh. So are they telling solar to restrict themselves? Back off? No, they've upped the spending on the grid by 33%. These are communists, mind you, so it can stay ahead of the game. They just said, no, don't slow down solar, keep going. We're just going to fix the grid. Here's 33% more money to upgrade it and keep it in check for the future. Mercedes-Benz is introducing its most affordable and most advanced sedan to date. And guess what, Brian? Its most affordable and advanced sedan is electric. So we talk about price parity of electric vehicles. Mercedes is there. We knew that it would start with luxury vehicles before it got down to cheaper vehicles. Well, that's where it's happening. So if you want a Mercedes, buy an electric one. And I think, you should if you want a Mercedes, because it'll be a better vehicle. This is an example of price parity, of course, and battery prices and experience in manufacturing. We all knew this. 5 years of this podcast, we all knew the story. Germany has put their 2045 net zero goals into their constitution.
Wow.
Countries with constitutions who respect their constitutions and then respect the climate and put that climate in the constitution. Interesting. Trump's plan to kill clean energy tax credits could spike household energy costs by $184 US by 2030 and $371 by 2035. That story is from EnergyWire. I don't have the link because I neglected to put the link in there. Oh, it's time for a CS Fast Fact. List of countries who have officially rejected the landmark Paris Accord in 2015 on fighting climate change. Here's the countries, Brian. Iran, Libya, Yemen, and you know them for their beautiful Gulf of America. America! Kind of disgusting company you're putting in keeping there. From our friends at the Moscow Times. Hello, Moscow Times. I'm sure you're listening.
Yes, surveillance, probably.
Sinopec, China's largest petroleum and chemical corporation, completely halted all Russian oil purchases in March, while three other companies, Zhenhua Oil, PetroChina, and CNOOC significantly reduced their Russian oil imports. This apparently has to do with a self-check they all did on sanctions in place on Russia. It's interesting because we think of China being sort of an ally of the evil Russia, and we don't want them to be buying their oil. I don't know if they're doing this because the Ukraine war could have a ceasefire or a conclusion. Why? But it's kind of odd timing that they finally decided not to take oil from Russia. Waymo, the driverless taxi company throughout the United States, they started in Silicon Valley, but they're always expanding now, and we have a new city to add to that list, and that city is Washington, D.C. The time is next year. So that is from the Waymo blog. Tesla deliveries are down in Europe by 43% in the first couple months of the year, although EVs are up 28% in sales in the same period, in the same place. And Brian, I thought to myself, that's remarkable, not because Tesla sales are going down, but because EVs are not going down with it. It used to be that Tesla was the whole shebang, and now we finally have a lot of competition where even if Tesla sales go down for whatever reason, the EV sales aren't affected by that. So that's pretty cool. That never used to be possible. BYD has made progress on silicon-ion batteries that are set to be cheaper alternatives to lithium-ion. This is a 10,000-plus charge cycle battery, Brian. And if you think of normal EV batteries, they're rated at 1,000 cycles. It doesn't mean you can charge them 1,000 times, but it means if you charge them from 0 to 100%, which no one ever does, 1,000 times, then they're only going to have like 70 or 80% capacity or 80% capacity, and that's going to be their essential life. But this is 10,000. Now, they're talking about putting these in battery storage, and they are. They've already have megawatt-hour level grid battery systems with these, because when you charge, the batteries, the grid guy who talked to my wife at Pickleball said, the batteries that we do have, they only do 1,000 cycles, so we're trying not to use them, which is stupid. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
But there's a cost to those batteries based on how many kilowatt hours how many thousand watts for an hour, how many hours that 1,000 watts is usable. And then you pay that much money. Maybe it's a few cents. But if you 10x that, then even if the battery's substantially more expensive, which sodium ion might be at this time, where it's going to be cheaper in the future because sodium salt is cheaper than lithium, 10,000 cycles means that those grid batteries, it's a game over. Once those start getting deployed worldwide, your Australian aluminum smelter, it might even be cheaper than the Quebec's hydro. They might even move off of the hydro that is abundant there and move on to something that is solar and batteries. And it's also got better low temperature, which is something you and I are interested in because we live in a very low temperature place. It really kills our battery range in the wintertime. And also high temperature performance, which means they can charge fast because one of the reasons they don't charge batteries as fast is the heat. They want to keep the heat down. And if you don't have to worry about that as much, then you can charge them faster. So that's cool. We'll have more on that later. Well, here's another CES fast fact. Nearly half of the world's buildings that will exist by 2050 have not yet been built.
Wow. Half
of the world's buildings that will exist by 2050 have not yet been built.
So there's a great opportunity to make them energy efficient.
You have to. It has to be that way. EVs will save the EU 20 million tons of CO2 emissions this year, just from the EVs that are already there. That is in Europe, 20 million tons of CO2 pollution saved because people are driving EVs. UK will plant 20 million trees in their first national forest in 30 years. That's a good news story. Emissions from building sector have stopped rising for the first time since 2020, the United Nations finds. Steel and concrete are 18% of the world's carbon emissions. And we have a link to that at the UN. And finally this week, Brian, a landmark lawsuit where kids sued America comes to an end, and not in a way we hoped, but it could have been worse, and we're going to recap all the good things that came from them doing it in the first place. This is the youth climate lawsuit that shaped many that followed it. This is 10 years old now, including two successful ones that we featured here on the show. One was in Montana, suing the Constitution there. This is in the New York Times, has a story on this, and of course other people do as well. The Supreme Court on Monday declined to hear an appeal in a landmark climate case brought by 21 young people against the federal government. ending its 10-year journey. Like, I remember one of these people was 19 at the time. Now she's 29, and that's a long chunk of your life there. But the case provided a blueprint for numerous other climate-related lawsuits that have had greater success. Yes, this has been a blueprint and has started climate lawsuits around the United States. Juliana v. the United States argued that the government had violated the constitutional rights of the plaintiffs with policies that encouraged the use of fossil fuels, but it was dismissed by the United States Courts of Appeal for the Ninth Circuit, where the judges ruled that the courts were not the right venue to address climate change. Our Children's Trust, we've talked about them a lot. That's the Eugene, Oregon nonprofit law firm that represents the plaintiffs, made its final legal gambit in the case last year when it asked the Supreme Court to vacate the appeals court ruling and allow Juliana to proceed to trial in a lower court. And that position was denied on Monday, but some observers also had considered it risky that they even went to the Supreme Court because, the Supreme Court of the United States, very ultra-conservative right now. They could have used this as a way to hurt climate legislation and law. So it didn't happen that way, thankfully. But it's been a run, but now it's like somebody has died but has started a whole wave of good things. Yeah. And that will continue on and continue on and continue on. And it's not the end of the world. And the Supreme Court didn't jettison longstanding environmental protections in the process, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's always a mixed bag when it comes to these climate lawsuits, and not all of them are going to survive. The law is a complicated and tricky thing, and sometimes it's just not going to work out, but it's amazing to try. All right, that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We're on social media as Clean Energy Pod. You can join our Patreon for special posts, and you can support us with with a purchase from our Clean Energy Show merch store. And rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And remember to hit the subscribe button.
And thank you to all our Patreon members, whether you're paying or not. We appreciate you being there. But we give a shout out to our Clean Club executive members, Green Bastard to Brent Rutley, every week. Join our Patreon today as a paying member and get access to our exclusive Patreon episodes, as well as all kinds of stuff. And maybe one day I'll figure out the Discord server and we'll have good conversations on there. I apologize, but yeah, I am what I am, Brian. I can't doing that. Thank you for supporting climate positive content, and we'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story.
They were pinned down from a Dishka, and the Dishka was coming from the third story of a 7-story apartment building. And then we blew that third story out within maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes of getting that 9-line